Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a good break. I thank IQPC, Pull to Win, for giving me this opportunity to actually speak to you about measuring quality in the interactive entertainment space. I've been working for close to about 14 years in this industry. I started my career way back in India. I used to set up gaming parlors. I actively built the esports market. I had a gaming community for about 20,000 users. I couldn't sustain it way back because having a website was expensive. And then I got into QA and production. I was working at EA. I set up EA India. And then I was a QA director at a few different places. My domain expertise is mainly in service delivery, quality assurance, product quality, which is what I hold close to my heart. One of the key things in this industry, especially for me when I joined Pull to Win, one of the key things I was trying to figure out is, looking at the diversity in our industry. We've got, and I'm going to cover, all of that in this. We've got different, platforms, test types, areas of test, and we've got, different, consoles, different mobile devices. We've got different test types, all the way from functional, compliance, compatibility, acceptance, smoke tests, security tests, and different areas of test all the way from UI to in-game, and then you have patches and DLC, which really complicate, if you want to measure metrics in a uniform, standard way. So which is why I took up that task of, trying to see if I can build some sort of a uniform metric system, which will help, different companies in the industry. I manage about 600 people worldwide for Pull to Win, and I tried to roll it out to about 350 people. And it's been working out great so far. So I wanted to share some of those best practices with you. I've got half an hour. I'm pretty limited on time. So I'll try and cover as much as I can. But if you have any questions or if you want me to go through it again, I would be more than happy to share that over with you. Just going over the agenda quickly, we spoke about the different platforms and test types. I'm going to talk about the essential metrics that we have in our industry. Touch base on test coverage and planning, and then quality control and management, and how we're going to go about it. So as we know, every tester is unique, test types are unique, platforms are unique, area of test is unique, so it gets really hard for us to evaluate it. So I came up with 4 key constructs which define quality for me as to how I would want to measure quality. So first being productivity of a tester, test team, and overall productivity. Second being quality of defects. Whether it's game testing or software testing, the key role for any tester is to detect and describe, and we all know that. So quality, I wanted to measure the quality of defects written in terms of if it's been written well, if they follow the appropriate steps, if the SDR is correct, if the attachment quality is correct, and all of that. And then test coverage. How do you go about planning in terms of test coverage? Scoping is a big keyword, especially across managers, directors, when they want to scope out a new title, especially for an MMO, how do you allocate budgets? And then, last but not least, but communication. How do you measure communication? How do you go about, evaluating if communication is effective, if it really works for the company and everyone else? So present day, if you actually look at it, I've heard, these things from a lot of, leaders in the industry, in terms of what they do, in terms of best practices, all the way from the old school way of doing things, which is redlining bugs, vetting bugs, the basic metrics that we look at, which is the duplicate rate, fixed rate, and then at the lead and manager level, we have a feedback-based measurement, whether you're setting KPIs for your team, or you have like CSAT. When I'm talking about CSAT, assuming your internal stakeholders, your internal customers, are your producers and developers, how do you, we go about CSAT. And then manager, we look at cost per bug. I'm not a fan of cost per bug, so I've scratched that out, but I wanted to show it to you there because I still have heard a few QA managers talk about it, so, and then postmortems. So present day, this is what I have seen or heard from different service delivery leaders as to what they do in the industry. So how do we go about the quality control process? For this quality control process, what I did is I established an independent team which would follow the cycle. Essentially, they would define a quality control process for any given game and test type. Now, as I said, every game is unique and every test type is unique. So we had to define a very unique quality control process for every single game and test type, and then we had to implement it. And then we evaluate it to see if the quality control measures that we put in place actually work. And then we assess to see if they, if it's actually working, and otherwise we go back to the first stage. And then we do a root cause analysis. The whole idea of trying to set up this process was to avoid the last stage. I do not want to hear about postmortems. I do not want to hear about RCAs. I want to fix a problem or fix an issue with QA, like within the first week of test, or the first 2 weeks of test, or the first few cycles of test. So, which is why what we did is, we built this quality audit team, and these are the, broad responsibilities of this audit team, which is like we audit and evaluate a tester team and team's performance, evaluate the quality control measures that we've put in place and see if it actually works, implement, the QC practices that we set. We've got almost 100 different QC practices that we follow. So, and we try and pick the best ones that actually apply, to a particular type of test and the game. And then we validate the QC process. And then we set a ratio depending on the test type and the platform to see how many auditors we need for a particular, team. For an MMO, the ratios differ from the ratios for a social game or a mobile game. And then you have, a continual process improvement plan also in place, which I'm sure some of you or most of you know about it in terms of, we use different QC tools for it, all the way from the 5 whys, cause and effect diagrams, and then additional QC tools. We classify, the root cause once we've identified an issue and as controllable and non-controllable, and then we charter a corrective and preventive action for it, and try to see how best we can improve on a continuous basis. So let me quickly dive in. The meat of this presentation is actually in the next few slides. So the approach for that, as I said, continuously measure and improve productivity, key measure for us. Pattern analysis. This is, in fact, the most important thing of my presentation, where I don't give any goals to my testers, none. I don't ask them to post 20 bugs a day, 30 bugs a day. I don't give them any goals which are objective in terms of measurement. I look at these different metrics that we have, I analyze the patterns, and I give them feedback based on the patterns I've seen. So pattern analysis is what this audit team does. And then I have a QC scorecard, which is a quality control scorecard to evaluate the defect, the quality of the defect that we have. And I'll show you, the QC scorecard in the next few slides. And then client communication, as we all know. So measurement of productivity. So we need to measure it at a project level and at a tester level. So just giving you examples of different things that we measure in terms of bugs reported, classification of bugs across, invalid, duplicate, fixed, and then bugs per hour. These are the different metrics that we set: accuracy, quality score, and others. So along with that, we came up with different metrics. These are just sample metrics that I'm just showing out there. I know you can't really see it clearly, but there are over 150 metrics that we've defined. And I can show you a few of these metrics. So once we define those metrics, then we've got a project measurement which shows this is actual statistical data from one of the projects that one of my teams do. So if you actually look at this, you look at, let's say 45% of the bugs uploaded were major and say 44% were minor. I set different metrics for the dupe rate should be less than 5%, invalid rate should be less than, say, 3%. I set different metric and measurement key points for my teams so that just to see what the patterns look like. And again, I don't give them any targets. And then what I do is I try to see in terms of, once I get statistical reports like this, I get a more in-depth report on test measurement by the tester to see what the criticality of bugs look like by the tester. So if you look at this particular report, tester 3, for example, has posted more number of minor bugs and more major bugs than anyone, and is one of the best performing testers, if you want to so quote unquote call it. But then I look at the fix rate of the same statistic. The fix rate is higher for tester 4. So even though tester 3 is reporting more number of issues, the most valuable number of issues is tester 4 because they're reporting issues which are actually getting fixed. So we evaluate statistics like this, and then we try to derive in terms of the feedback that we can give to the tester and try to see what testers are doing different. And then examples would be like I've seen a few testers focus more on multiplayer and some testers focusing more on UI. And then I try to switch roles and see if they find more bugs. I find like a lot of different examples like that, which really help us understand testers, understand the kind of bugs that come into the system. Now, going ahead to the next slide, then I look at it at a project level. What does it look like for me across different cycles of test? So I'm seeing that the fix rate is increasing by cycle, for example, for this project. And the volume of bugs, if you actually look at it, that the number of bugs getting fixed are highest in cycle 4. So then I go back to production, the dev teams, and ask them in terms of what went wrong, like what was different, not what went wrong. So it could be that even though they fixed maybe a lot of minor issues, it was just because those issues they wanted to get through in the first few builds, and then go over some of the major issues in the next patch. So everyone has, every dev team has, they have their own priorities. But this helps me understand what the fix rate is, what is the volume of bugs, like when do developers actually get busy, and helps me plan, helps me better deploy testers across teams. Now, so that was on productivity. So I get a lot of different metrics like that. I just wanted to show a few just because I'm limited on time. How do we measure test coverage? And I just wanted to give compliance testing as an example. So if you look at, like, say, compliance testing for PS4, the different, especially when you have your TCRs, TRCs, and lot checks, you have different criteria that we have to look at, and you can't just measure them because the testers need to have these criteria in the back of their head before they start testing. They cannot just go ahead and run those test cases. So, but how do you plan in terms of, for a small game, for a large game, how do you plan the total number of hours that it takes? So we drill down across each and every criteria, and we try to put together the total number of hours that it actually takes to scope for test. This helps me with planning. When I look at this across 100 different projects, tomorrow the vice president of production would come and ask me, okay, well, what do you want to budget for compliance testing? I have an answer. So this helped me with helping plan for scoping. Then I look at different metrics from test execution. Michael made a very good point, especially about TMMI and ISTQB and software testing. We do both. I've got teams who work on game testing, who work on software testing, who work on security testing. So I got them all together, looked at best test practices that we can take from each of their teams, and we put together a real robust set of metrics that is there in our industry. And we look at it all the way from the design, test execution, and different levels, and we put together a lot of metrics. And these are some of the metrics that we put together. This is just for coverage and test execution that you can take a look at. Moving over to the next slide, again, this is on requirements, like in terms of what do you measure, the leakage index, the coverage, and we've got different formulas that show in terms of how to best plan, how to best execute tests across for test coverage. Now, the next slide, I'm going to talk about measurement of quality. Quality, for me, I'm not talking about overall quality. I'm just talking about quality of defects. When a tester writes a bug, what is the quality of the bug that's been written? So what we've done is we've defined a scorecard, for example, which has different attributes for what a bug comprises of. So if you see some of the attributes, was the priority selected correctly? Was the STR correct? Was the attachment quality correct? So what happens is once all the testers finish testing, I have my auditors audit maybe 4 samples, four assessments per tester per month, as an example, across these different attributes, and they give them a score. And then I know exactly where the tester is actually going wrong. Are they going wrong in attachment quality? Are they going wrong in, everyone's got bug writing guidelines, but are they actually following it? This will help define that. And then I get, again, statistical data, which help me give them a lot of feedback. So if you look at the quality score by testers, you will see, in terms of by tester what the average score is, and then I know in terms of where exactly they went wrong. So if the summary was wrong, the priority was selected correctly, attachment quality is low, so I'm not worried about it. So I call them as a team and I give them feedback there on the first one to try and get better at it. This way, I'm not waiting for a postmortem. I'm not waiting for an RCA for any of these. I'm fixing it as and when I find it. And then, I have 5 minutes left, so success of running this program, the standards are uniform and so is quality. I can replicate this for functional, for compliance, for compatibility, for most of what, 70% of testing that we actually do is mostly functional testing. So it's uniform, and so is quality of testers, so because they're all measured on the same platform. We've got established patterns that help improve performance. Look at patterns and keep giving them feedback as much as I can. Validation and fixes performed in real time. So all these fixes are real time, like, it's within a matter of days or weeks. Insights into key strengths of testers. I know which tester is strong in which type of test, in what area, how good are they in terms of consistency over a few weeks. I get all of that statistical data that help me plan. Test coverage is optimized. I know test coverage, if I run this for like 20 different games across 20 different platforms, I know exactly how test coverage looks like. I can measure it, I can plan for it, I can do all that I want. And then risk of missing areas of the test are minimized. So you don't miss tests because you're planning, with so much of statistical data that help you plan, so your risks are fairly minimized. So, it's easier for you to run tests. So that's it. Thank you. Questions? Anyone? Yep.
Yeah, so we collected so much of data, so this audit team and this data collection, was this like responsibilities given to the team leads? How did you roll out this program?
Okay, good question. So your question is that the audit team was independent, or was did the lead have any responsibilities? So, the audit team is separate. The lead has enough tasks for them to manage, all the way from, assigning tasks, making sure the build is working, smoke tests, reporting, making sure that they're on task and all that. So this team is independent. The lead will get feedback about the teams, but, they independently report directly into me, and they have no connection, and I get this data, and then we give them feedback. So I hope that helped. Other questions? Well, any questions, please feel free to catch me over a drink, or I'll buy you a shot. Thank you.